Flow. Stay in the flow. Stay in the flow. It's a late summer Saturday afternoon. The sun is out, the sky is blue. The Jackson family drives down to the beach for the day. When they arrive, the kids run straight to the water before their parents can get the umbrella into the sand. It's supposed to be a good day, and for a while, it is. The water is warm. The waves are rolling in just right. The father, named Jeff, strong man and a good swimmer, been in the water all of his life. He wades out a little further than everybody else in the water. Not too far, but just enough to feel the ocean on his chest. He's relaxed, he's smiling. He's watching his kids play closer to the shore, and then something shifts. He takes a step backwards towards the beach, and his feet don't touch the bottom. He tries, and nothing again. The sand is gone, and before he can process what's happening, his body is being pulled. Not by a wave, not by anything he can see, but by a current underneath the surface that is stronger than anything that he's ever felt. An instinct kicks in. Jeff starts swimming hard towards the shore. But the harder he fights, the further out he goes. The beach isn't getting closer, it's getting farther away. His arms start to burn, his breath gets short, and then real panic sets in because he's doing everything he knows to do, and it's not working. Now, a lifeguard would tell you that rip currents kill more people every year than tornadoes, hurricanes, and lightning. And they don't kill people because the water is too deep or the waves are too big. They kill people because of what people do when they get caught in the rip current. They kill people because the instinct is to fight, to swim, to push against the pull. But the current can move faster than an Olympic swimmer. The more you fight, the faster you exhaust yourself. And that's exactly where Jeff found himself on this summer day. But here's what the lifeguard, every rescue expert, every survival guide will tell you, that if you find yourself in this moment and in this situation, stop fighting. Don't swim against it. If you can, swim parallel to the shore to get out of the current's path. But if you can't do that, if you're too tired, you're too scared, you're too disoriented, there is something else you can do, and that is to float. Stay calm. Conserve your energy. Signal for help. Let the water hold you instead of fighting the water. The people who panic and fight are the ones who drown. The people who stop flailing and trust that the water can hold them are the ones who survive. And I believe that this is what Jesus is talking about in John 15. There is a flow of divine love that runs from God to Jesus to us. And Jesus says it plainly. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. Stay in the flow. Don't fight it. Don't step out of it. Don't try to manufacture your own way back to shore, because the love is already moving. The current is already running. And your job is not to create a new flow. Your job is to stay in the flow of God's love. John 15 continues the conversation around the table with Jesus and his disciples, and Jesus has already washed their feet. Jesus has given them a new command. Jesus has promised them greater work, and now he goes deeper. He says, I am the vine. You are the branches. Apart from me, you can do nothing. He's telling them how to sustain what he's calling them to. Jesus moves from what they're called to do to how they're going to sustain it. Jesus moves from what they're called to do to how they're going to sustain it. And then in verse 9, he makes it more personal and explicit. He says, as the Father loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. He doesn't say, obey me and I'll love you. He says, I already love you, and obedience is how you stay in the flow of my love. But too many of us, if we're honest today, have been fighting. We've been trying to swim back to God through performance. We've been trying to swim back to God through religion. We've been trying to swim back to God through willpower, and we are exhausted. And Jesus is saying, stop fighting. Stay in the flow. Obedience isn't how you earn my love. It's how you stay in my love. We would do well today to pause here because many of us have been taught that obedience is how we earn love. In our relationships, we learn early that love is transactional, that as long as we say the right things, agree with the right things, do what people want, we get to keep their love. And we bring that same framework into our relationship with God. But what Jesus is offering in the text is transformative love, not transactional love. And it is this kind of love that compels us to stay in its flow by being obedient to the commands that Jesus is giving. It really is the only way we're able to fully live as disciples of Christ and as a community of faith. Hear me, we don't gather to learn and to worship and to serve because we're trying to earn our way into divine favor or work our way into a spot in heaven or perform our way into the next level of Christ's love for us. The love is already given and the flow is already moving. Too many of us are spiritually exhausted because we've been fighting the very thing we've been called to flow in. We've been doing things based on performance instead of presence. My hope for all of us is that we are able to find a way to live from a place of flowing in God's love and following that flow wherever it leads us. It might move through some painful seasons, but it will consistently carry us towards the very best that God has for us. Jesus wanted his disciples to carry the work forward. He spends this moment at the table giving them the key to how to do this. And his advice for them is the same for us. Stay in the flow of love that God has poured into me and I am pouring into you by doing what I have told you and shown you to do. The question that the text causes us to wrestle with this morning is, if Jesus has already poured God's love into our lives, what does it actually mean to stay in the flow of that love instead of stepping out of it? And the answer really is one word: obedience. Somebody say obedience. Obedience. It's the way we stay in the flow of God's love. It's where the love takes us, and it's who the love makes us. And if we turn to the text, verse number 9, the first thing we discover is that obedience is an expression of love. Here's what it says in verse 9 and 10. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. As God loves Jesus, so Jesus loves us. Jesus describes the quality of the love that he has for us by relating it to the quality of love that God has for him. He is not offering a watered down version of God's love. He is saying this love is the same quality, the same depth, and the same character, and that is flowing to us before we do anything. Just imagine what that might change for us if we could more fully grasp that the love that we are seeking for everywhere else is already fully moving in our direction all the time. It would change the way we view ourselves and view one another in amazing ways, because some of us have been looking for love in relationships that can't carry it. We've been trying to earn love at work through promotion and achievement and applause. Some of us have been performing for love in church, hoping that if we do enough, we'll finally feel loved enough. But Jesus is saying the love is already here. It has always been here. You don't have to earn what's already flowing. What Jesus is offering is that love comes first, then obedience. Obedience is not a requirement to receive love. Obedience is a response to love that has already been flowing our way. Obedience doesn't turn love on. Obedience keeps us positioned in love's flow. And Jesus is reframing obedience as the way for us to remain in the flow of divine love. And I know that when we read the text and we see, if you keep my commandments at the beginning of verse 10, we automatically feel the pressure of having to live up to an expectation. However, I like to suggest that obedience isn't about completing a checklist. It's about guarding a relationship. The idea of keeping in the text is not about rule following. In the original language, the word keeping carries the idea of guarding, watching over, or treasuring. This is a word that is about protecting something precious and valuable. It has the same meaning as keeping a promise to someone. When we keep a promise, we do it not just because we want to be true to our word, but because we value the relationship. We promise to do something that we might not fully want to do because we know it matters to the person that we're doing it for. And here is Jesus saying that if our relationship with him is important, then we will do what he instructs us to do because the actions help to guard our relationship with him. And Jesus models this for us because just as the love and relationship with God and Jesus is a pattern for how we are loved, Jesus' obedience to God is a pattern for how we respond to that love. Jesus' obedience is the natural expression of the trust and the intimacy that he has with God. So when he is about his Father's business, doing what God commands, he is moving in the flow of God's love. And I need us today to consider where God's love is leading him. It's leading him to the cross. The flow of the Father's love didn't take him around the suffering. It took him through the suffering. And Jesus didn't step out of the suffering. He didn't fight against the suffering. We know what the old song of the church says, that he never said a mumbling word. He didn't say, this isn't where I thought the love was taking me, so I'm going to get out of here now. He stayed in the flow, even when the flow led to Golgotha's hill. And his keeping of the Father's commands cost him everything. Because obedience in the flow of love is not always easy, but it is always the path of trust. And I know that being obedient like Jesus feels like a lofty goal for us. In fact, right now, some of us are thinking about all of the ways that our obedience to God has been sporadic or selective or inconsistent. And I need for us to be clear on something this morning, that God's love for you is not contingent on your performance. It is not God is not subtracting God's love for us because we haven't picked up the Bible in 3 weeks, or we only come to worship once a month, or we haven't forgiven people who hurt us, or we've allowed the limiting thoughts and habits to hijack our pursuit of purpose. We need to address those things for sure because they move us out of alignment with the flow of God's love that is already fully there. The love never stops flowing toward us. When we don't respond to it with obedience, then we move ourselves out of the flow. Obedience is trusting that God's love for us is always flowing to us. Obedience is the expression of God's love. It's how we stay turned toward the love that is already ours and not how we earn it. Obedience is the expression of love. That's how we stay in the flow. But the flow isn't standing still, it's always moving. And the next thing that Jesus shows us in the text is where our obedience takes us. Obedience is also about direction. Check the text, verses 11 to 13 say, these things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be full or complete. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. Verse 11 begins with these things, referring to what he has said. Just said, abide in my love, keep my commandments, stay in the flow. And then he tells them the purpose, so that my joy would be in you and your joy would be complete. Here's the reality. Most of us have never connected obedience to joy. We connect obedience to duty. or obedience to sacrifice. We connect obedience to gritting our teeth and getting the hard thing done because we're supposed to. And we associate obedience with a part of faith that feels heavy. But Jesus says the opposite. He said, I gave you these commands so that you would have joy. His commands are not restrictions designed to limit your life. Faithfulness to his commands shouldn't lead to a constant misery in our lives. They are directions designed to lead us into the fullest experience of his love. Staying in the flow of love isn't just keeping you alive, it's taking you somewhere. Obedience gives your life direction, and the direction is towards joy, not the kind of joy that depends on circumstances, not happiness because everything is going well. This is Jesus's own joy that comes from being in alignment with God's love. And he says that joy can be in you and it can be complete. So if your faith feels joyless, if your walk with God feels more like a grind than a gift, then the text isn't telling you to try harder. It's asking you whether you stepped out of the flow of God's love. Because obedience inside the flow of love produces joy. Obedience outside of the flow, driven by guilt or driven by fear, produces exhaustion. The same actions, but rooted in a different source with a completely different outcome. So the question isn't whether you're doing enough. The question is whether you're doing it from the right place. Some of us have been living as if obedience and joy are opposites. We've been grinding through our faith, doing the right things for the wrong reasons and wondering why it feels so heavy. And Jesus says the problem isn't the commands, the problem is the source. Come back to the love, let the flow carry you, and watch the joy return into your journey. Verse number 12, Jesus concentrates on all of the commandments, into one. He says, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. This connects to what we heard in John 13. And Jesus gave this as a new command, as his distinguishing marker for the disciples. And here in chapter 15, he's showing us what grounds it. The command to love one another doesn't come from willpower. It comes from staying in the flow. You can't give what you haven't stayed in. You can't pour out love for others if you've stepped out of the love that was pouring into you. But here's where we have to be honest. Some of us have been trying to love one another in our own strength, and it's not working. We're running on fumes, and this is where it shows up in our life together. When we step out of the flow personally, it affects us communally. When we show up for one another out of obligation instead of overflow, when we serve out of guilt instead of gladness, fellowship feels more like a one thing on the list instead of a thing that gives us life. And then we wonder why community feels forced instead of free. The answer is in the flow. Because when we step out of the love that God is pouring into us, we don't have anything left to pour into anybody else. We can't love one another as Jesus loved us if we're not abiding in the love that Jesus is giving to us. The flow doesn't just keep us alive, it gives us something to offer. The direction of obedience is always towards others. And so Jesus is saying you can't give what you haven't stayed in. Get back connected to the vine. Come back to the flow and let the love that fills you become the love that overflows, because the fuel for the direction is always the love that we stay in. Verse 13 shows us what love looks like when it flows all the way to its fullest expression. It says, greater love has no one than this, than when someone has to lay down his life for his friends or her friends. Within hours of this conversation, he will be arrested. He will be tried, he will be beaten, and he will be crucified. The cross is not abstract as they gather around the Passover table. It is imminent for Jesus, and Jesus is telling his disciples what you're about to see is not defeat. It's actually the fullest expression of love. This is where the flow leads. This is what love looks like when it holds nothing back. The flow of the Father's love didn't take Jesus around the suffering again. It took him through it. But it's also direction for us. Not that all of us will face physical death for our faith, but Jesus is describing the direction of our lives, a willingness to lay down what's comfortable, to lay down what's convenient, to lay down what's self-protective for the sake of someone else. That's where obedience in the flow takes you. It takes you away from self-preservation. It takes you towards self-giving and away from what's in it for me and toward what does love require of me. I think this is the part that makes some of us step out of the flow. It's not the commands themselves, but it's where the commands lead us. We start trying to control where the love takes us instead of trusting the one who is directing it. We are willing to follow Jesus when it's convenient, but the moment obedience requires real sacrifice, the moment it requires real forgiveness, the moment it requires real generosity, the moment it requires real vulnerability, the moment it requires the real lying down of what we want for the sake of what love requires, we turn tail and start swimming for the shore, trying to get out of the flow. And what Jesus is saying is that the very direction of my love was designed to take you. The direction of divine love will cost you something. It cost him everything, but it's still the path of joy. It's still the path of trust, and it's still the flow you were made to live in. So don't fight it. Stay in the flow, because obedience gives your life direction, and the direction is always the same. Away from trying to protect ourselves and do what we want to do, into self-giving love and into deeper joy. Obedience is the expression of love, is how we stay in the flow, is the direction. It takes us towards joy and towards loving one another sacrificially. And finally, obedience is the distinction because it changes the dynamic of our relationship with Christ. Check what it says in verse 14. It says, you are my friends if you do what I command you to do. At first glance, this can sound conditional. It can sound like Jesus is saying that if you perform well enough, I'll upgrade you to friend status. But that's not what's happening here. Jesus isn't setting the terms for friendship. He's describing what friendship with him looks like. He's saying that people who stay in the flow, people who respond to my love with obedience, people who let the current carry them instead of fighting it, those are my friends. Not because they earn the title, but because they share my heart. Think about it in your own life. Your real friends aren't the people who just agree with you. Your real friends are the people who know you well enough to trust your direction. They listen when you speak. They move when you move. Not because you're controlling them, but because the relationship is deep enough that trust is natural. And that's what Jesus is describing. Obedience isn't the price of friendship. Obedience is the evidence of friendship. And this matters because it reframes how we understand the commands that Jesus has been giving. Everything he has said hasn't been as a boss issuing orders. He's saying it as a friend who knows where the joy is, knows where the love flows, and who knows what kind of life actually works, and is trying everything in his power to get us to go in that direction. He's not demanding compliance. He's inviting trust. And when we trust him, we step into the life that he's